I grew up in Florida in this little beach town right by the ocean. The population was quite small and everyone knew everyone. This story took place during the early weeks of my senior year of high school. The biggest chatter that year was that we had a new student. For privacy reasons, I'll give her a fake name, Maya. We hadn't had a new student in years, and everyone was excited to get to know Maya, who had moved to Florida from California. The only problem was that Maya didn't seem at all interested in getting to know us. Maya was a strange person, putting it nicely. She wore only black clothing and had an odd necklace with a pentagram on it. She was quiet and would only speak when spoken to. There was always a hard, almost angry expression on her face. People soon gave up trying to make friends with her and mostly left her alone. I had math with Maya, and I was always careful to be extra nice to her. I let her borrow a pencil if she needed one and offered to turn her work in when she was done with it. Something about her gave me the creeps, and I felt like by doing this, I at least would never be a target of hers. She seemed to appreciate these gestures. One day after school, I was laying on my bed and scrolling through TikTok, one of my favorite ways to relax. I was on my FYP mindlessly going through videos before something caught my eye. It was Maya. I didn't even remember following her, but there she was. The TikTok was incredibly strange. She was seated in a dark room with candles surrounding her. It looked like some kind of seance. I clicked on her profile and began scrolling through all of her videos, one by one. I noticed that she had barely any followers, so not many people had seen the videos. Each video was creepier than the one before. It looked like Maya really did practice some form of witchcraft. Most videos appeared to be filmed in some sort of a cave. There were strange red markings on the walls of the cave, and the sound of water could be heard in the distance. The video was clearly filmed somewhere near the ocean. I scrolled through the videos, zooming in to try to get a better look at the location of the cave. I noticed the moss growing along the floor and some white flowers growing around the opening. All of a sudden, something clicked in my head. I had been to the cave before. It was only a short distance away from the shore, and my brothers and I had played there many years ago when we were younger. I knew I could easily get into it by using my dad's fishing boat. You're probably wondering why I had any interest at all in going anywhere near Maya and her creepy cave hideout where she was doing who knows what. The feeling was similar to that of watching a scary movie. It made your stomach turn, and it was disgusting to watch, but you still wanted to know what was going to happen. I just couldn't curb my curiosity. Now, I wasn't totally crazy. I was way too much of a wuss to try going to the cave at night. I waited for a bright, sunny day. I thought the cheerful weather would somehow make my trip out to the cave slightly less creepy. My biggest fear was that Maya would be in the cave when I got there. From the looks of most of her videos, it seemed like she usually went there at night, so I figured it would be safe to go there during the early afternoon. I went to the harbor and unchained my dad's fishing boat before taking off in the direction of the cave. After a bit of circling and redirecting, I finally found the entrance. The second I saw the white flowers, I knew I had the right spot. I tied the boat up and got out. My heart beat with nervous excitement as I began to make my way into the cave, gravel crunching under my sneakers. At first, nothing really looked out of place. It didn't look like anyone had been there recently, but the cave was deep, and I knew Maya's setup was probably far from the entrance. After I had been walking for a few minutes, most of the light from the sun had diminished, and I had to turn on my flashlight. I shone it forward and saw something in the distance. I quickened my pace, and I instantly knew I had found the right place. It was like a scene you would see in some sort of horror movie. There were red markings on the wall, stacks of candles, what appeared to be the remnants of a fire, and lots of strange charms. The most overwhelming part of the strange environment was the incredible, overpowering stench. It smelled like something had been rotting for a long time. I shone my flashlight around, trying to figure out what the stench was coming from. I was instantly drawn to a large utility barrel, like the kind used at construction sites. I had a sick, awful feeling in my stomach about that barrel, but I had to know what was inside. Surely, whatever it was not living. I grabbed the lid of the barrel to remove it, but it was on tight, and I couldn't open it while still holding my flashlight. I put my flashlight on the ground and pulled the lid upwards with full force, ripping it free. The stench that came from inside was almost enough to take my breath away. I dropped the lid on the ground and scrambled to pick up my flashlight. I then shone it inside the barrel, my fingers trembling. The sight before me is by far the most disturbing thing I have ever seen, and I will never be able to lose this memory. Inside the barrel was what was left of an older woman. It looked as if she had been dead a long time, and her body was beginning to deteriorate. Her clothes were tattered, and there were red marks around her neck. I was still processing what I had seen when all of a sudden I heard a voice behind me asking me what I was doing. I spun around, only to see Maya standing behind me, holding a knife with a long blade. Her expression was terrifying. Her eyes empty and soulless. I let out a scream so awful I could barely believe that it came out of me. I took off running, dropping my flashlight in the process. I ran past Maya and in the direction of the entrance of the cave. Without my flashlight, I was left in complete darkness and could only hope that I was going the right way. I could hear footsteps behind me, and I could tell Maya was running after me at a quick pace. I had never been more scared of her in my life and wanted nothing but to put as much distance between me and her as possible. I was unbelievably relieved when I was finally able to see some light coming out in the distance, and I knew I was getting closer to the exit. I ran as fast as I could to that light, not stopping once to catch my breath. I stumbled frequently along the way, my knees hitting the rough ground hard, but I didn't take time to examine my injuries. I just kept getting up and running as fast as I could. When I finally reached the exit and ran into daylight, my heart dropped at yet another awful surprise. Maya had removed the anchor of my father's boat, and it was floating out in the ocean a good distance away. I didn't have time to second guess anything and jumped straight into the water, heading toward the boat. I wasn't a great swimmer, but I knew how to keep my head above water. I reached the boat, my lungs burning from the extra exertion. I started the engine and took off in the direction of the harbor at full speed. When I glanced over my shoulder, I could see Maya watching me from the entrance of the cave. I started screaming for help the second I pulled the boat into the dock, and I attracted some passerby. I told them what I had seen, and the police were called to the area. I did my best to give them directions to the cave, and they quickly took off to investigate. By the time they got there, Maya was gone, but the barrel was still there. It was taken back to shore, where it was picked up by the coroner to be examined. Less than 3 hours later, Maya was picked up by police at a local gas station and taken into custody. She was questioned about the body in the barrel, and she was surprisingly honest. Her answers were enough to shock even the toughest of people. It turned out that the body was of her mother, whom Maya had sacrificed for some sort of ritual that she read about online. Maya had somehow convinced herself that she was a real witch with some sort of mystical ability. She believed that performing the ritual, she would gain extra powers. She had drugged her mother, placed her in the barrel, and then carried her by boat to the cave, where she performed the ritual involving killing her through suffocation. The whole situation terrified the entire town, but especially me. I was traumatized and had to go to therapy to deal with the disturbing images I couldn't get out of my head. My friends and family did their best to comfort me, but it was hard dealing with the reality of what I saw. The only comfort I had was knowing that by trusting my gut and investigating the cave, I ended up uncovering Maya's secret. Now, she wouldn't be able to get away with the murder or hurt anyone else around her. I can now finally relax, knowing that Maya will never see the light of day ever again. Instead, she'll spend the rest of her days in a cage, with only the four walls around her to stare at. Even though a lot of time has passed, I don't think I'll ever be able to go into a cave again, no matter how many people came with me. What would you have done if you were the one that opened the barrel? Drop a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.
When you think about it, it makes sense. As you're home alone, someone or something could be lurking around your home at any given time. Of course, you aren't keen to check it out, so you ignore it. Much like when you take a shower and close your eyes to avoid getting shampoo in them, you feel vulnerable, much like when your eyes open after those fleeting moments of leaving your guard down. And the anxiety just gets worse as you gaze upon the drawn curtains to your right. They're drawn like your eyes are too, because you sense a presence beyond them, as if an entity was using it for refuge. an entity that failed its task once again. Of course, you could draw back the curtains and reveal the existence of this being, but you aren't very keen on doing that, so you ignore it. When you think about it, it materializes. Much like when you sit by the computer and the clock strikes 3 a.m. You go through all the hiding spots in your mind that you've deduced it has around your residence. The curtains, being only one of them, you know it likes corners, and rooms without light as well. It likes areas where it can't be spotted by the limited range of the human eyesight. Those are its favorite. With this information, you could attempt to ambush it and cast it away for good. But you aren't keen to do that, so you ignore it. In fact, not thinking about it nullifies the 50-50 chance of it existing. You're okay with it being real, and being a figment of your imagination, but not one or the other. If it's real, then it's out to get you. If it's made up, you're going to feel really stupid. If it's both, you're neither right nor wrong, so you ignore it. Therefore, it lives on as both, as long as you don't take the time to acknowledge it. There's one slight error in your logic. By taking the time to consider your potential actions, you thought about it. You could have just ignored it, like you did with everything else. Instead, you validated its existence. So before you go any further, remember this. When you think about it, it's there. Being stuck in traffic can be hell. Backed up for miles both ways, no end in sight, you start to wonder if you'll ever see moving pavement under you again. People can't just fucking drive anywhere. Everyone's like, oh, people are terrible drivers and such. But the hard truth of it is that I've been to a whole lot of places, and it's a worldwide epidemic. I used to love driving. My friends and I would go on trips up and down the East Coast all the time. That drastically changed one night. I miss it sometimes, but you can never really scrape the image of dozens of people dying in front of your eyes out of your head. It was February 1998, and I had just come back from visiting my girl in the city, and I was headed back to my place in northern Jersey. It was a cold, rainy night, and we should have had snow, but it wasn't cold enough. Kind of ridiculous to say not cold enough in January, but I think you get my drift. The drive should have only taken about an hour or so, depending on traffic. But things were particularly clogged that night. Trying to find out if there was an accident, I started flipping through the stations, looking for a report, but came up with air. As soon as I hit George Washington, I knew something was wrong. Things had been slowing steadily up the bridge, but the second I got past the mouth, there was a huge jam. The rain that had been threatening us for the last hour or so started coming down in sheets, as if some great beast in the sky was shaking off its coat. And I hit the wipers. Between their swipes, I could see tons of cars ahead of me, and to the right and left, stretching across the entire length of the bridge, and the rear view showed the same. Great, I thought. Not gonna be home for at least another 3 hours with this shit. I shot a glance out the passenger window. I could barely see Ross Stock in the distance. The lights of the main picnic area are slowly being sucked into the encroaching darkness. A feeling of uneasiness started to creep up my spine, and I ignored it. Leaning back in my seat, I hummed along to the Chumbawamba's Tub Thumping. I hated that song, but it was popular, and you couldn't go more than half an hour without hearing it. Just as the first Danny Boy hit, I heard something else. Past the radio, past the obnoxious snarl of Dunstan Bruce's lazy voice, past the windows of my car, which were beginning to softly rattle. I heard a shrill noise that sounded like a siren. I jumped, torn from the queer catatonia that the traffic brings. Suddenly aware of my surroundings. It was raining much harder, sounding like hail on the roof of my shitty old Toyota. I could barely see anything under the dull yellow light of the bridge's post lights. Peering into the yawning darkness ahead of me, it was clear none of the cars had moved at all, as far as I could tell. There was no commotion, no trouble, so where the hell had the sound come from? Was I imagining it? Cars on the other side of the median were also stuck still. No traffic was moving either way. Rain filtered through the bright beams cast by the headlights. I could see the faces of drivers, craning their necks all around, looking for something. A source. They heard it too. My windows began vibrating harder, more noticeably, starting to actually rattle against the door. I touched mine, feeling a deep hum inside the glass. I reached to turn the radio off, but the second my hand touched the dial, the volume flared up like I'd cranked it in the wrong direction. Desperately, I tried to turn it off, but it just seemed to get louder. Even with my hands clapped over my ears, I could still hear it bleeding through.
Just a lager drink. Bring the divider.
Another siren tearing through the radio waves. Another wave of flexing glass.
Song from him of the best times.
Squinting into the dark, I could see the other drivers all frantically moving within their cars, pounding at the dashboard with their fists and trying to get out of the cars, yanking on the door handles. I grabbed at mine, unlocking it, and tried to open it. It was stuck. Just as I thought my head was going to explode from the sound from my own heart pounding in my ears, the music cut out, leaving the air heavy, pregnant. Then, louder than anything else, louder than a jet engine taking off, louder than what I imagine the world's end sounds like, the siren rang out a third time. Where the first two times had been high and shrill, this one was carried by a deep, throaty bellow. It came from everywhere. Inside the car, from the radio, the air surrounding the bridge, directly in front of me, behind me. It assaulted my ears like the wasted orgasm of something from the Mariana Trench. And then, the first explosion happened. People were screaming. The sound was faint against the yell of the siren, but I could hear it. I could see them, men, women, and children in the surrounding cars, all panicking. The bridge rocked. I could feel it sway just the slightest, groaning over the roar of the wind, still whipping the rain into a frenzy. My mind jumped to terrorist attacks. Just last year, we'd had the Empire State Building shootings, and everyone was still on edge. Another explosion. More rocking, more screaming. I tried the handle again. I don't know what I was thinking, trying to get out of the car with a possible bombing happening, but the brain sometimes doesn't function all that well in moments of panic. I looked over to the car next to mine, to my left. A man was driving, a woman sitting in the passenger seat. I could see a young boy sleeping in the back, probably no more than 8 or 9. The car started rocking. The people inside were getting frisky, but there was definitely nothing X-rated going on, just panic and fear. The man, who had been pounding on the door and shouting just a moment before, suddenly stopped, folding his hands in front of him on his lap. He leaned back his head into the headrest. A small smile rolled across his lips. The woman turned to him. She was saying something, her lips moving. She started shaking him when he didn't respond. From somewhere off behind me, a trio of explosions rang out like gunfire. Fascinated, glued to my seat in this unwanted hell, I watched as the woman shook the man harder and harder, but he remained silent, unmoving, apparently extremely content in the moment. Something moved in his face, something bigger than a smile. I pressed my face into the rain-covered window in an attempt to get a better look. I realized that his skin had shifted, as though a giant wart had suddenly popped up on his cheek. Then, one appeared on his forehead, another 2 on his neck. The woman jumped back, and I could finally hear her screaming his name. John. John's skin continued to jump, producing the quickest case of overblown cystic nightmare acne I had ever seen. It took over his entire face, perverting the skin into a soft, bubbling pillow, and he finally burst. The contents of his body covered the woman in a steaming layer of carnage. She vomited on herself, turning the inside of the car into a variable human rainbow. Shrieking like a full-on alley cat fight, she slammed her fist into the window over and over, and I saw the first boil pop up on her skin, just under her left eye. She reached up to it, her hand shaking, the skin of her fingers beginning to raise in inch-long puffs, and tried to push it down. The skin caught on her nail, and popped like a cherry tomato, spraying the window in a vertical arc. Another 2 lumps jumped in to replace their fallen brethren, and she began throwing herself into the window, flailing with everything she had. Hands beaten raw, she managed to shatter the glass just as it overtook her. The skin and muscle leapt into the rain, like it had been electrified off her, some of it kissing my own car. Her head lolled out the broken window, and the kid in the back seat never woke up. All around me, a litany of wet, meaty pops rang out like a bodily tattoo across the bridge. I could see similar acts of expulsion scattered throughout the cars as far as I could see the people inside. There didn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to the pattern. The skin on my neck twitched, jumping back and forth like there was a bug skittering underneath. I slapped at it instinctively and felt something burning hot and pulsing just under the surface. It was like touching a fleshy tube full of burning gel. Raising shaking hands in front of my face, I saw the skin of my fingers beginning to inflate like a balloon. Slowly and methodically, it raised off of puckered, convulsing muscles. Twin bubbles formed on my right thigh, and I jerked my leg. I felt them strain and burst wetly against the rough fabric of my jeans. As the skin of my hands reached their capacity and finally sent a wave of blood and pus across the steering wheel and my lap, conjuring a torrent of vomit from my shaking body, I succumbed to the pain and blissfully blacked out. I don't know how long I was out for. I don't really know much of what happened that day. I know what the police said, what the CDC said. They declared it not to be a bioterrorist attack. There was no sign of disease or radiation or any other crap that would explain what happened. They tallied a total of 82 deaths and 24 injuries across the bridge, which only took an impressive 72 hours to completely clear. The only thing they didn't mention in any of the reports, though I know the other survivors all shared the same story, was the sound of the siren. The police had no record of it whatsoever. For some reason, I didn't mention it either. Whenever I tried to during my subsequent interview, I felt my mind go blank, dark, like something had dropped a curtain over my memory. I was out of the hospital in a month. Massive blood loss, missing skin all over my arms, neck, and chest. I had to have a bunch of grafts taken from my ass and legs. Furthest thing from fun I could actively describe. I've never gotten behind the wheel of a car again. Cabs and trains, buses for me. It's inconvenient, but it's definitely gotten easier over the years. I tried to drive a few times, but as soon as I saw the scars on the back of my hands gripping the wheel, my mind flashes back to the bridge, and I can hear the sound of the siren, clear as day. My name is Eddie. I live in a small farmhouse in New South Wales, though I won't disclose my exact location. I guess I can't exactly say I live there anymore. I don't know who in their right mind would be living there after what I've seen. So I suppose I should say I lived there for a very brief period. You see, my Uncle Reggie passed away last month, and having no children of his own, he left the farmhouse to me. They found Uncle Reggie lying face down in front of the sink, dead from a heart attack. Now, Uncle Reggie was the strange sort. My parents never talked about him, and he never visited. He just kept to himself up there in his house, all alone. No wife, no girlfriend, no pets. Just him and his wheat field. I don't even know why he bought that place, my father said, the morning after we heard Reggie passed on. He never does anything with it. I wonder why he left it to you. Regardless of why Uncle Reggie decided to leave his house to me, I was absolutely delighted. It was a little more than a shack with 4 rooms and a bathroom, but I was 18, and it was a house that I would have ownership over. So, to me, it was a palace. I moved in only 2 weeks ago. On Monday, I took a week's worth of holiday at work and drove to my uncle's house that morning. The outside of the house was as you might expect from the aging grump who kept to himself. The wood siding was almost nearly devoid of paint, with a couple flecks of white left. The front of the house had a good-sized porch, though the wood banister that ran from the stairs and wrapped around the porch was broken. and I decided that my first act of home renovation would be completely removing it. Once inside the house, though, Jesus Christ. If someone showed me a picture of the outside of the house and then showed me the inside and told me they were the same place, I'd call them a raving lunatic. Apparently, Uncle Reggie cared very much about his inside living conditions, despite seemingly not caring at all about the outside of his house. The entire home was fully furnished, which was the first plus because it meant I wasn't going to have to move much of my own stuff at all. But I can't even describe how clean the house was with words. I couldn't find a speck of dust in the entire place. I thought I was going to spend the entire day cleaning out trash, but this was definitely a welcome surprise. I walked through every room in the house, which didn't take long, until I came to the kitchen. My eyes were immediately drawn to the kitchen window that sat just above the sink. Through the window, staring into me, was the ugliest scarecrow that I've ever seen. It made me jump when I saw it, and I cursed out loud to no one in particular as I fell back against the wall behind me. My heart thumped in my chest, but as soon as I caught my breath, I stepped closer to the window to get a better look at the thing. The scarecrow's head was made out of straw and a sack of burlap, like any other, I suppose, but it was the metal plate attached to the burlap that gave it its face. For its eyes, 2 holes, equal in size, cut into the metal, and within the holes sat stones with elaborate symbols carved into them. The metal plate contoured around the head of straw and had symbols similar to the ones on its eyes drawn in what I assumed to be red paint all along its edge. I looked beyond the scarecrow to the wheat field that lay behind it. The wheat crop was high and stretched for miles on end. Wind blew through the field, giving the impression of something moving about in the wheat. I then drew my attention back to the scarecrow. "You'll be one of the first things to go," I said out loud to the scarecrow as if it could hear me. Soon after that, I went to work, tearing apart the porch banister, which came apart very easily, and threw them down into a pile in the open area of the rather big yard, a good distance from the house and the field. I then walked around the house to where I knew the scarecrow stood. I untied the rope that tied the scarecrow's arms and legs to the iron cross sticking out of the ground, only a mere 2 feet from the house. I then carried the scarecrow, which seemed unnaturally heavy, to the burn pile. I went and grabbed the gas can that I kept in the back of my truck and doused the scarecrow and all in gasoline. I kept an eye on the fire for a minute to make certain it wasn't going to spread anywhere. Then I went back in my truck to head to town for paint. I was back at the house about a half hour later. The flames of the fire had nearly died out. It was the metal plate that was once its face. Good, I thought, as I prepared myself for a long day of painting. I went straight to work, painting the entire house. It actually didn't take long at all. Given the size of the house, though, I guess that's not a huge surprise. This wasn't the first house I've ever painted either, so I knew I'd probably have to go over it again in the morning. After I lost daylight, I began working on moving in small stuff from my truck, my TV, my game system, and the like. It was about 9 o'clock when I stopped working for the night. I settled in the kitchen at the table, listening to the radio and eating some beans that I heated up on the stove. I was about to get up and put my bowl in the sink when I saw it. The scarecrow in the window was back. Or at least that's what I thought at first. There was definitely a shape in the window. I could make out its head, but nothing else. I sat there, frozen in silence for several minutes, unsure of exactly what to do. I could see the slight movement, the slow shift in movement, as whoever was outside my window breathed. Finally, I called out, "Hey, who's out there?" The figure then darted from my sight. I ran quickly to the front door, which, aside from the windows, was the only entrance into the house. I ran to the door and turned the deadbolt. I then knelt down to my tucker bag, which I left lying next to my boots near the door, and pulled out my hunting knife. That's when the sound of heavy rain came. I waited there, sitting on my couch in the living room, waiting for whoever was outside my house to try to break in. I had my cell at the ready to call anyone if I really needed to, but I didn't want to have to do that. Call me silly, but calling the police to handle something was just not something I ever wanted to do, if I can help it. So I waited. The sound of rain poured against the roof and walls of my home. I was pissed about it ruining a good day's worth of paint, but I knew it wouldn't take long to redo. I thought about getting up and going to the window to look out to see how bad the rain really was, but thought better of it. If that guy was still out there, I didn't want him seeing where I was. The rain is a soothing sound, though, and eventually, sitting on that comfy leather couch, I fell asleep. I woke up in the early hours of the morning with a start. My hand was still grasping the handle of my knife firmly. I stood up and looked around the house, door still closed and locked, all windows still in one piece. Good. No break-in. I walked out the front door of my home to see what kind of damage the rain did to the yard. The night before sounded like Bloody Katrina, so I was sure the yard would be flooded. I stepped out into the sun-drenched porch and was shocked to find no water anywhere at all. The porch was dry as a bone, and the yard didn't seem to be wet at all. I walked down the stairs of the porch, onto the yard, and knelt down, putting a hand out to feel the grass. Not even a little damp. I scratched my head, stood up, and turned back to the house. Then, when I saw what was on the house, I ran straight to my truck, threw the key in the ignition, and drove the hell off that property as quickly as I could. There, in the still wet paint that covered my house, were thousands of handprints. I'm sitting at my parents' house in my old room. I pull out my phone to call my mom or dad. Both are at work. My plan was to explain to them that instead of moving, I just wanted to sell the house. But I have a voicemail on my phone, so I listened to it. It's my uncle's lawyer, the one who carried out his will.
Hey, Eddie. How are you, mate?
Sorry to bother you, but I forgot to tell you something your uncle wrote in his will. He mentioned that I should tell you not to disturb a guardian, or Samad. He said if you do, they will come for you, and they won't stop till you're dead. Crazy bugger. Anyway, it's my job. You take care. The phone fell from my hands. I was unable to speak as, once again, came the sound of heavy rain. The medication makes me better. Words I have to remind myself every time I shake the bottle out over my hand. The pills take the pain away, a lifeline to live by. The things you see aren't real. They're just your way of coping. Words I hear reflected back at me. Ones I meant to repeat as the supreme mantra for mental health. Except that isn't how this works. It isn't how any of this works. I can abide by their rules, listen to their lies, and take their so-called medication, but it doesn't make reality any less real. I can shoot the shit with false idols, and play backgammon with bleeding gods till the crows come sprawling, but I'll never be able to shake the sweats that come when night falls. Now, it's dark. Night's fallen. I'm walking to my local corner store. My boots are sinking straight into the pavement, but I pull them out with a huge every step of the way. I just need a pack of cigarettes. I'm down to my last 2, plus my lucky. I'm walking, thinking about simple things like how they're tearing down every other ancient building to make a lot for the one next to it. How the clouds look like mushrooms, and I wish that could mean something more than a metaphor for nothing. I'm thinking about how I need to pay my phone bill before it gets shut off for the 3rd month in a row. And like I said, I'm thinking about simple things. I'm standing here on the corner, outside the concrete storefront, painted a flaking pale blue and white, Colors to make you calm, the colors of the sky, the soft linen nurseries, and other sanctified thing. I'm shaking out the change in my pocket, a few quarters that'll make a difference between cancer and slightly better tasting cancer. And I see the lamppost across the street blink once, twice, then go out altogether. I'm thinking, man, tax dollars at work, eh? I nudge the man next to me in my head. I don't actually touch him. The lamppost bends over, touching the ground, and the plastic cover across the pale citrine beam opens up with a mouth. It's got 3 rows of equally yellow jagged teeth. It spits soft, steaming fire. I'm thinking, man, I really need to get that prescription refilled, because the doc sure ain't gonna like this. Sniffing the ground, smelling up chewed gum, piss, and God knows what, the lamppost crawls up to a rat footing its way through the gutter. It sniffs once, twice, then strikes out. A rat's death row squeal sounds like a human child if you strain your ears hard enough. I smile. I'm thinking, man, good thing I take that medication, because city lights never looked so hungry as they do tonight. It all started with the knocks. Lucy, my daughter, played a game with her friends. I learned this when I happened to ask her why she knocked on her bedroom walls so often. She always did so at night. The sound made it hard for me to go to sleep. It was annoying. She stopped eating her dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and stared at me. I knock, and the hands come. I didn't have an urge to ask any more questions. Partially because I knew the truth. Lucy was only 4 years old. Kids her age still had imagination. She was just playing pretend. Refusing her invitations to see a demonstration, I left her alone for the rest of dinner. Later that night, I was sleeping when a crying Lucy came into my room. "Mommy, the hands won't go away," she whispered. I let her climb into my bed, then I got up to investigate. My mind was still waking up as I opened the bedroom door. Thick darkness enveloped the small room. I sighed as I flipped the switch. I froze when I saw them. Handprints. Tons of them, covering the wall space above her bed's headboard, spread out with even distances between each. Each had only 3 thin fingers, and each were the size of a desktop computer monitor. Too big to be human. They were all so black. All I could do was stand in the open doorway, with my hand still on the light switch. It wasn't just the size and the mere presence of the handprints that kept me frozen there, but also something else. The fact that they were behind the wallpaper down the hallway. I could hear knocks come from my room. The canary's call echoed against the tunnel's damp walls, leading us deeper into darkness. We'd long since left the vicinity of our mining lights, relying on lanterns to navigate the porous cave and its uneven, muddy floor. Where else were we supposed to go? The earthquake had obliterated our only exit. It was either stay put and risk starving to death, or proceed through the mountain's natural tunnels in hopes of finding freedom. Carson, an experienced miner, had begun leading us from the front. The fear of the unknown had unnerved me, but I knew we'd be okay. As long as the canary kept singing, we'd be okay. The ceiling encroached on us as we advanced, bringing its finger-shaped stalactites closer and closer towards us. I wiped sweat from my brow and peered ahead. Darkness. We walked for hours without a breath of fresh air. I could feel myself growing tired, but refused to slow my pace. If my team could keep walking, then so could I. The shuffling of our feet, the canary's tune, The sound of dripping water were all that was heard in the dim tunnel. We weren't wasting precious oxygen on idle chit-chat. The further we went, the tighter the passages. My head began to spin from fatigue and dehydration. I needed to throw up, but I couldn't allow myself to do so in such a small space. I knew the scent would linger for the rest of the journey. The canary's call was a beacon of hope. It was my light at the end of the tunnel, a promise that the next stretch of the journey would be safe. It kept me and my fellow miners from panicking. As long as the canary kept singing, we'd be okay. I tried to focus on the melody and closed my eyes, imagining the blue skies above my house. I thought about being in my daughter's loving arms, and the days we would spend watching the birds perched on our picket fence. Then I stumbled. I was back in the cave, back in the miserable muck of the dirt and sweat. Maybe I just needed to distance myself from the others. Perhaps my position near the end of the line was starting to weigh on me. Maybe I just needed to feel like I was closer to the exit. I pushed past the procession, head spinning more and more, the closer I got to the front. I felt a sinking feeling at the pit of my stomach at the sight of it. The canary lay lifeless in its cage. Carson, face swollen and worn, turned towards me. He slowly brought a grime-caked index finger to his lips, soundlessly shushing me before dropping his hand. He turned to the front, curled his lips into an O, and blew. I understood then, but we weren't making it out alive. We saw the hurricane coming from miles away. They're not exactly subtle, and this one was bigger than most. It was a Category 4 as it made landfall, and was expected to make history. Unluckily for me, evacuation never came. I was housed not terribly far from the ocean. Well, within the predicted path of the hurricane. It was going to hit my area no matter which way it went, but I was at the mercy of the government. And the government doesn't exactly have its shit together. The hurricane hit my city like the wrath of God. Through the barred windows, I could see trees bowing to kiss the ground. Debris was flying through the streets, smashing windows, cars, anything in its path. But worst of all was the flooding. The storm raised the sea level, which meant that what was previously above sea level now drowned below it. From my cell, there was little I could do but watch the steadily rising water. The guards had long since abandoned us, not one bothering to unlock even a single cell. I cursed them and their cowardice for leaving us here, for leaving me here. As the waters reached my waist, I began to cry. For 1 month. 1 month until my trial. Nobody had declared me guilty, yet here I was, sentenced to death. I can hear the other inmates yelling as it reaches my chest. They're banging on the bars, their doors, screaming for someone to let them out. There's no one left to free them. The water fills my cell. The last of the air is gone. My thoughts are filled with my mother and father, my wife and children I will never have. My chest is on fire, lungs aching. I try to hold back, but I can't. I open my mouth and breathe. Alex Stewart has been the absolute greatest best friend that I could have asked for, but that isn't to say that she didn't have her quirks. First of all, some might say that Alex is a little off. She was into spooky stuff. I mean, I'm not saying I didn't enjoy a good horror movie now and then, but her bedroom was like Halloween year-round. She'd plastic spiders on the walls, and creepy-ass mannequin that she dressed up in regular clothes with fake blood splattered on them. She even had orange and purple lights strung all over her room. She never took any of them down. I've been friends with her since both of us were 11 years old. That stuff has been there ever since. Other thing about Alex was that she was sort of ditzy. I don't mean she was stupid. She was very intelligent. I just mean, ever since we were little girls, she would always forget things. She's always misplacing her keys or her phone. I can't tell you how many times she locked herself out of her own house. The most irritating part of her memory loss, though, happened at night. I would always stay over at her house when we did sleepovers. I just always preferred being at her house over mine, even with the creepy decor. The thing is, oftentimes, Alex and I would share a bed. We were both small-framed girls. The two of us would lie in bed after Alex had turned off the lights. And after minutes, we would start conversations. Meaningless, really. She would ask me what boys in school I liked, or would talk about shows we've seen. She would ask me about my parents and stuff like that. Not really important conversation, but I still remember them. Then, the next day, when I asked Alex about our talk, or remembered something I wanted to tell her, she would have a puzzled look on her face. "I don't remember talking last night," she had said. The first time I mentioned one of our talks. Yeah, we were up for hours," I had said. She thought for a moment and then shrugged. I must have been sleep-talking. I go right to sleep usually. I've been known to talk in my sleep. I was irritated when I found that out. How could Alex hold such coherent conversation and not remember a bit of it the next morning, even if she sleep-talks? Refusing to believe that she wouldn't remember any of what I said to her at night, I asked again and again the next morning after I stayed over about our talk. Every time, she would shrug and say, "Sorry, Jen, I was out." It baffled me, but I got over it after a while. Eventually, I just stopped asking her about our talks, and I just accepted that she wouldn't remember. As we grew older, I realized how forgetful Alex was anyway. It made a little more sense to me, but it still baffled me how much we talked, and she still remembered none of it. It was a mystery to me, a mystery that went largely unanswered until we were 17 years old. It was Halloween. Alex's parents were at a costume party and told us they wouldn't be home until very late, and Alex and I were eating popcorn and watching horror movies. We just began watching one of my favorites, but Alex was fading fast. "I have a headache. I'm gonna go lie down," she said. I turned to look back at her spot on the love seat that sat back a bit from the recliner I was on. "Okay, sorry you feel bad. I'll probably pass out on the couch. Get some sleep." "Okay, thanks." She stood up, walked down the hallway connecting the living room to her bedroom. I turned back to my movie, began munching down on popcorn. Fast forward 20 minutes, and I heard Alex open her door and step out of her room. I was still enjoying my snack, watching the screen intently as the movie reached its climax. I heard Alex plop down on the love seat behind me. "Feel any better?" I asked. "Yeah, I think so," she said weakly. "Why do you like this movie so much? It's so violent." I laughed. "What do you mean? You love stuff like this. You're the queen of creepy." There was a long pause, then said, "I guess." "Hey, Jen?" "Yeah," I said. "Promise you'll never stop coming to see me?" I stopped eating and my face grew red. What an odd thing for Alex to ask. I was about to begin college in a different town that year, but this was the first time Alex said anything about it. It was odd, and I sat, trying to think of how to respond, when there was a clicking sound at the front door, and Alex's mom and dad walked through the front door. It was placed just a few feet away from the left of the television. "Welcome home," I announced as Alex's mom flipped the light switch next to the door, illuminating the room in a flash. I blinked for a moment as my eyes readjusted. Alex's parents did the same when they looked around the room. Alex's dad laughed and her mom had a confused look on her face. "Jennifer?" she said with an upward inflection. "Yeah?" I asked. "What is that doing in here?" I was puzzled, but I turned to look as she was pointing her finger. sitting in the love seat, and the clothing spattered with fake blood, was Alex's mannequin. In my backyard, we have a koi pond. It's been kind of a never-ending project of mine and my wife's. Something we've put a lot of time, effort, and money into in the last 3 years we've lived in our house. A few weeks ago, we decided to extend it some, and I finally got started on what needed to be done to do that last week. I started digging. After about 3 hours, I dug a good amount of the area I needed to out, and was about 4 feet down in this particular spot when I hit something. Whatever it was metal. I continued digging, looking for an edge of whatever this was, and I found it. I followed the edge around as I kept digging, and it turned out to be a square with a handle on top and 2 hinges on one side. I pulled up on the handle, but I couldn't get it open. I figured it was a chest or a case of some kind. So I dug around the sides of it, but no matter how far I dug, it just kept going. I finally came to the conclusion that it was a hatch of some sort, perhaps a bomb shelter. When we bought the house, there had been no mention of a bomb shelter there, nor had there ever been a mention of it in the history of the house. I dug an area around the hatch so I could more easily get to the top. After a few hours, a night of sleep, and a few more hours, the next day of blowtorches, drills, and hammers, I finally got the hatch open. As soon as I pulled the door off, I was hit with a wave of foul odor. The smell was stale and putrid, and was like a mixture of rotten eggs, spoiled milk, and a group of dead skunks. After taking a moment to catch my breath, I finally was able to hold it while I looked inside. There was a ladder that led downwards, probably about 20 feet, and I could just barely make out a floor what the sunlight provided. I went to my garage and got a dust mask, hoping it would at least mask the smell some, and grabbed a flashlight. I began to descend down the ladder while my wife stayed up top, curiously observing. The smell only worsened the further down I got, and the mask was doing next to nothing to offset it. I stopped several times on the way down, warding off the urge to vomit. Finally, I think I got used to it enough not to gag with every breath I took. I made it to the bottom, and there was a small corridor to the left, past which was a large room. Just as I had suspected, it looked like a fallout shelter. There were 2 rows of shelving units that once held non-perishable foods, almost all of which were gone. I found a light switch on the wall next to me, which I turned on. To my surprise, 3 rows of fluorescent lights lit up, allowing me to see the entire area. The room was large, likely taking up nearly 2/3 of the square footage under my basement. There was a single twin bed with a nightstand next to it, on which was a handheld radio. I can't imagine it working that far underground. There was a rug on the floor, on top of which was a small desk. On the desk were multiple books, numerous notepads, and various other belongings. In one corner of the room was a bucket that was clearly used for relieving oneself, as evidenced by the crusted over shit on the sides and the various yellow stains. How the contents of the bucket were removed from the hatch, I have no clue. There was a makeshift hanging rod attached to one of the walls, on which was a very, very old-looking suit, and resting on top of it was a military helmet. I collected the loose contents of the shelter, the books, notepads, radio, helmet, etc., and placed them in a box that I found near the food racks. One odd thing I noticed is that there were no remnants from food products that were consumed. This place had obviously been used, as the bed was unkempt, the toilet had been utilized, There was no area where trash was kept, and I didn't think much of it. I hadn't yet looked at what the notepads contained, but when I did finally take a look, I was thoroughly creeped out. All they said, for hundreds of pages, were the words, "Please let me out." Nothing else, just those words, written in different sizes over countless pages. Next, I did some research on the helmet. It was a standard issue United States Army helmet used during World War II. I don't understand what a soldier would be doing in a fallout shelter in the Midwest during the Second World War. The next thing I found to be strange was that, while most of the books were from the same period the helmet was from, 2 of them were printed in the late 2000s, and the radio was a model that was produced in 1999. Completely baffled, I returned to the shelter. I again descended the ladder. I decided to do a thorough inspection of the place, my hope being to gain any kind of insight as to who had been down there. I looked at the remaining food on the shelves. It all seemed to be from World War II era. I looked for hidden doors, but found nothing. The walls were all perfectly solid, without a flaw to note. I sat down in the chair at the desk and opened the drawers, but found nothing. I examined the desk for anything that may have been etched into it, but the wood was next to flawless. It was only when I backed the chair up over the rug and took a step back that I realized the floor beneath me was hollow. I yelled up to my wife that I had found something. I moved the chair to the side and pushed the desk off the rug. Then I slid the rug to the opposite direction of the desk, which revealed a trap door, which was being held closed with a master lock that sat in a divot cut into the metal floor, so as to keep the floor flush. I used a hammer and chisel, and after a short time, I dismantled the padlock. I opened the hatch within the hatch and fell back after getting a glimpse of its contents. Beneath the trapdoor was the source of the smell. It was a decomposing body, one that looked as if it had only been there for a week or two. The area was just big enough to fit this man, who was positioned in a way I didn't presume possible for a human. The only way I can describe him as is folded up. I immediately called up to my wife to call 911 and got out of the hatch. The man was wearing clothes from the World War II era. In his pocket was a military ID, showing that he was born in 1979. I found out later that the name on the military ID wasn't registered in any armed forces database, and his social security number wasn't one that was distributed by the United States. Nobody by his name was ever reported missing in the history of the country. It was determined by investigators that the ground above the hatch had remained untouched for decades, and it was confirmed that the door was in fact the only means of entering and exiting the shelter. The questions are obvious. Who was this man? How did he have this technology from the future? How long was he in the shelter for when he died? When did he die? Where did all the shit and piss and garbage go? And how was he only a week or two decomposed? The strangest question, to me however, is who locked him under that trap door and moved the rug and desk back over it. Can you believe how sick the universe is? I sobbed at the psychiatrist, who opted to listen as opposed to calming me down. Smart man. I don't think I could stop, even if I wanted to at this point. If that little prick had been going 5 miles less per hour, my daughter would have survived. That's pretty twisted. I laughed in disbelief, my tears blurring my vision so bad I only saw the outline of the good doctor. Can you believe that, Dr. Hilson? If that bastard had been going 30 miles per hour instead of 35, my daughter's little body wouldn't have gone flying over his car, and the chances of her dying would have been decreased to 50 instead of 80. There's a reason why the neighborhood speed limit is 30. I waited for the old man to say something, but he remained silent, his wide eyes staring at me. I gritted my teeth in anger. Really? He didn't have anything to say? He's a well-known and respected psychologist in our city, for God's sake. What's his problem? He should be used to his patients pouring their hearts out to him. Where were his soothing words of comfort? You know what's sicker? The judge had the nerve to let that murderer off the hook just because his daddy is some rich head doctor. I glared at the doctor, who was tightly strapped to the passenger seat of my car. I turned the key and started up my car, the headlights flickering on and illuminating the kid who killed my daughter. He was lying on his stomach in the street. He was not even a quarter of a mile away from my car. When the headlights hit him, the kid started moving around frantically, but the ropes around his ankles and arms kept him on the empty street. Even in the dark, he looked just like a worm. I turned to the head doctor and smiled at him. He started shaking. My tears kept falling. Let's do an experiment. My daughter's neck broke when your son hit her, going 35 miles per hour. I wonder what will happen if I hit your son doing 40. I hit the gas and the car shot forward. Finally, the doctor started to scream. The car jumped a little as the tires rolled over his son's body. I rolled my eyes at the incoherent noises the shrink was making and looked at the rearview mirror. My burning eyes widened in shock. He's still moving. Damn. Statistically speaking, there's a 20% chance of your kid living through that. Tough boy. I wonder. I tapped my finger against the steering wheel, ignoring the shrink's pleas, before I got a great idea. I beamed at him. Let's see how long he can last. I backed up over the kid, going 5